crusade. But even before that, Black Americans had been fighting for civil rights. It's just that in the 1950s, they started to win. So desegregating schools was a key goal of the civil rights movement, and it started in California in 1946. In the case of Mendez versus Westminster, the California Supreme Court ruled that Orange County, of all places, had to desegregate their schools. They'd been discriminating against Latinos. And then California's governor, Earl Warren, signed an order that repealed all school segregation in the state. That same Earl Warren, by the way, was Chief Justice when the landmark case Brown versus Board of Education came before the Supreme Court in 1954. The NAACP Legal Defense Fund, under the leadership of Thurgood Marshall, had been pursuing a legal strategy of trying to make states live up to the ruling in Plessy versus Ferguson that required all public facilities to be separate but equal. They started by bringing lawsuits against professional schools, like law schools, because it was really obvious that the 3 classrooms and no library that Texas set up for its African-American law students were not equal to the actual University of Texas's law school. But the Brown case was about public schools for children. It was actually a combination of 5 cases from 4 states, of which Brown happened to be alphabetically the first. The Board of Education in question, incidentally, was in Topeka, Kansas, not one of the states of the old Confederacy, but nonetheless a city that did restrict its schooling by race. Oh, it's time for the mystery document? The rules here are simple. I read the mystery document. If I'm wrong, I get shocked. Segregation of white and colored children in public schools has a detrimental effect upon the colored children. The impact is greater when it has the sanction of the law, for the policy of separating the races is usually interpreted as denoting the inferiority of the Negro group. A sense of inferiority affects the motivation of a child to learn. Segregation with the sanction of law, therefore, has a tendency to retard the educational and mental development of Negro children and to deprive them of some of the benefits they would receive in a racially integrated school system. Stan, the last 2 weeks you have given me 2 extraordinary gifts, and I am thankful. It is Earl Warren from Brown versus Board of Education. Huzzah! Justice Warren is actually quoting from sociological research there that shows that segregation itself is psychologically damaging to black children because they recognize that being separated out is a badge of inferiority. All right, let's go to the thought bubble. The Brown decision was a watershed, but it didn't lead to massive, immediate desegregation of the nation's public schools. In fact, it spawned what came to be known as massive resistance in the South. The resistance got so massive, in fact, that a number of counties, rather than integrate their schools, closed them. Prince Edward County in Virginia, for instance, closed its schools in 1959 and didn't reopen them again until 1964. Except they didn't really close them because many states appropriated funds to pay for white students to attend, quote, private academies. Some states got so into the resistance that they began to fly the Confederate battle flag over their state capitol buildings. Yes, I'm looking at you, Alabama and South Carolina. On December 1st, 1955, Rosa Parks refused to move to the back of a bus in Montgomery, Alabama, and got arrested, kicking off the Montgomery bus boycott that lasted almost a year. A lot of people think that Rosa Parks was simply an average African-American working woman who was tired and fed up with segregation, but the truth is more complicated. Parks had been active in politics since the 1930s and had protested the notorious Scottsboro Boys case. She'd served as secretary for the NAACP, and she had begun her quest to register to vote in Alabama in 1943. She failed a literacy test 3 times before becoming one of the very few black people registered to vote in the state. And in 1954, she attended a training session for political activists and met other civil rights radicals. So Rosa Parks was an active participant in the fight for black civil rights long before she sat on that bus. The bus boycott also thrust into prominence a young pastor from Atlanta, the 26-year-old Martin Luther King Jr. He helped to organize the boycott from his Baptist church, which reminds us that black churches played a pivotal role in the civil rights movement. That boycott would go on to last for 381 days, and in the end, the city of Montgomery relented. Thanks, Thought Bubble. So that was, of course, only the beginning for Martin Luther King, who achieved his greatest triumphs in the 1960s. After Montgomery, he was instrumental in forming the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, a coalition of black civil rights and church leaders who pushed for integration, and they needed to fight hard, especially in the face of massive resistance and an Eisenhower administration that was lukewarm at best about civil rights. But I suppose Eisenhower did stick up for civil rights when forced to, as when Arkansas Governor Orville Faubus used the National Guard to prevent the integration of Little Rock Central High School by 9 black students in 1957. Eisenhower was like, you know, as the guy who invaded Normandy, I don't think that's the best use for the National Guard. So Eisenhower sent the 101st Airborne Division, not the entirety of it, but some of it, to Little Rock, Arkansas to walk kids to school, which they did for a year. After that, Faubus closed the schools, but at least the federal government showed that it wouldn't allow states to ignore court orders about the Constitution. In your face, John C. Calhoun! Despite the court decision and the dispatching of federal troops, by the end of the 1950s, fewer than 2% of black students attended integrated schools in the South. So the modern movement for civil rights had begun, but it was clear that there was still a lot of work to do.